Every major group that grades the fairness of congressional maps gives your state an F. Common Cause, a nonpartisan government watchdog, even says your map, and I'm going to quote, represents a nearly perfect model for everything that can go wrong with redistricting. And I guess the question is, you talk about preserving democracy. How do you preserve democracy if you're using the same tactics that you've criticized Texas Republicans for?
But as I say, what they're talking about is a distraction. The reality is that the violation of people's voting rights is what Texas is attempting to do. That's what's wrong with their efforts right now.
So it's about that time where the Democrat media tour with all the showboating and virtue signaling on the topic of gerrymandering and their opposition to Texas doing mid-decade redistricting is beginning to backfire on the Democrat Party exactly as we predicted, for a very precise reason here. As we've been breaking down for you since the beginning on the subject of so-called gerrymandering, or the partisan drawing of congressional maps, Democrats are egregiously guilty. As a matter of fact, when you break down the 2020 census, they're actually far more guilty than Republicans are nationwide. Long story short, they're the ones who rigged the congressional maps, as we've been saying here. All the Republicans are doing is balancing the scales. But the Democrats made a huge mistake here, which is that they basically thought nobody would call them out on this, right? They figured that the regular American out there would not be detailed enough to go Google the Illinois Congressional Map. They assumed that the fear-mongering over all of this would be enough to win the argument. The issue is they let this play out for too long, right? Instead of kind of making a couple of posts about it, making a few speeches, and moving on, they decided to make this the biggest political issue of the month. And as a result, eventually, as these cocky and arrogant Democrats go on TV to campaign and talk about how amazing they are and how much they believe in fair elections, sooner or later, there was going to be that moment where one honest mainstream media host out there, even honest in the moment, decides to ask the very basic question to Democrat governors specifically who keep going on TV to talk about this stuff. Hey, if you're so against gerrymandering, then why did you gerrymander your own state? If Texas is not allowed to make their state more red on a partisan basis, explain, for instance, Mr. JB Pritzker, the very guy currently housing the rogue fugitive Democrats right there in his own state. If you're going to be doing this huge showboating about gerrymandering, explain your own congressional map. And newsflash, guys, would it be exactly surprising to find out here today that they could not do it, right? They refused to address their own questions. Again, the arrogance, the hubris of these people, they never thought these questions would come up. But I again point to this as yet another example of how the longer these things go, right, over time, Democrats lose these arguments that, it always happens this way. They make a big new scandal or new thing to get outraged at Donald Trump, the Republicans, or the right wing over. And, initially it lands something. And then when you dig up the fact that they're lying, as is so often the case, the truth is not here remotely in any way on the side of Democrats, how quickly that all turns. So in today's video, I want to highlight for you two major interviews conducted this Sunday with Democrat governors. We first of all have New York Governor Kathy Hochul, who, is one of those who hides behind the supposed independent commission and how amazing her state is. And then suddenly they ask, wait a minute, why is the electoral representation in your state so disproportionate to Democrats? She can't answer the question. But even more satisfyingly here, Mr. JB Pritzker, this absolute hypocritical, moronic scumbag himself, went on NBC and Meet the Press, probably thinking it would be an easy interview, and he was clearly not ready for the moment where finally someone confronts him on, how are you going to seriously be so arrogant and shameless to be the face against gerrymandering? How are you going to be the one sheltering Texas Democrats in your own state when this is what your congressional map looks like? Well, folks, that said, we'll get into it. We'll tell you all about it as we bring you here the latest updates on the nationwide redistricting battle that we've been covering in such detail. That said, guys, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Subscribing, guys, is not only the best way to support our videos, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date on all of the latest news and coverage. And with that said, let me just start off by showing you this Kathy Hochul clip so you can get an idea of what we're talking about here. Again, the longer this goes, the more they drag it out, Eventually, someone is going to state the obvious to their faces. Finally, it happens, and take a listen to how Kathy stumbles and then seemingly is just unable to deal with the very basic truth that Democrats are pretty egregious gerrymanderers long before Texas supposedly rigged their own maps here in 2025.
Here's how National Review summarized it. They said it was only 3 years ago that New York's Democratic legislature drew up a map so brazenly contemptuous of basic rules that govern a district's contiguousness that the state's Democrat-dominated Court of Appeals threw it out. The New York Times at the time called those maps comically contorted. That's their quote. So your state's highest court at the time, all the judges appointed by Democratic governors, they threw the maps out. So fair to say Democrats have done what they're now accusing Republicans of doing.
No, we followed the rules. We do it every 10 years. We base it on census.
But the court said you didn't follow the rules.
Well, we did follow the rules.
So the court was wrong?
Well, we followed the rules.
I mean, what? You know, we've obviously known that Democrats are massively gaslighting on this subject, but what kind of gaslighting is that? You say you did follow the rules. No, you didn't. That's why your own state Supreme Court struck down your congressional map, because it was illegal. And why was it illegal? Because you guys attempted to so egregiously gerrymander, the very thing you're accusing Republicans of doing. But Democrats are so innocent, right? They play so fair. They're totally followers of the rules that even your state's court struck it down. And now you're saying you're following the rules, but you're claiming that Texas is not following the rules, doing what they're currently doing. You say you followed the law because I guess in the end, the court forced you to have a more fair congressional map, even though it's not all that fair anyway. That's your example of following the rules. We followed the rules under court-mandated orders, and we're so superior for that. But Kathy, I'd also like to point out to you that Texas is also currently following the rules, okay? It is not, unlike what you tried to do with your congressional map, it's not actually against the law to do mid-decade redistricting. You know, all these Democrats are saying, you know, because people keep constantly asking them, if you guys gerrymander, what's wrong with Texas gerrymandering? So they've shifted, have you noticed this? They've shifted off of the narrative that gerrymandering is bad in itself, because guess what? They lose that argument because they're very guilty of it. So now they've been saying gerrymandering is bad when you do it mid-decade, right? That's what's unprecedented, is mid-decade redistricting, doing it not right after the census, to which I say, I mean, first of all, you can just use Wikipedia if you want. This is not the first time in history that there has been mid-decade redistricting. But secondly, it's not against any law. It's as long as it's approved by the state legislature, it's not against anyone's rules. So, you know, their argument here just is not looking all that strong on many different levels. And there you have it, guys. So with that said, let us now get in to today's main event, which is this absolute loser, JB Pritzker, the rogue fugitive harborer himself, going on NBC. Clearly not prepared. But first of all, I mean, we've been over this a million times, guys, but for those of you who have not watched the content, you're new to the channel, whatever, just to really briefly recap, this is the governor right now. This is his congressional map that he approved, who is currently campaigning against gerrymandering. As you know, and as we've been telling you, Illinois is arguably the single most egregiously gerrymandered Democrat state, or state overall, I should say, in America. And just look at it. You can see a prime example in this 13th district right here. I know it's in red, but it's actually a Democrat district. And essentially, guys, what they did, okay, here's a breakdown, by the way, just so you understand. This is the county map breakdown, right? How every county votes red or blue in the state of Illinois. And essentially, see this blue down here? See this blue up here? They drew this district, a Democrat district, right in the middle of southern Illinois, right? The very red part of the state, to just squeeze it, right? Another Democrat seat in there. Hence why, by the way, you have a 14-3 Democrat to Republican split in terms of the congressman in that state, despite the fact that Kamala only won that state by 11 points in 2024. That said, I mean, here's just an idea of the math, right? If about 45% of the electorate in Illinois are Republican, how is it that they only have 3 of the 17 congressional seats? It should be 7 to 8, right? And if you look at the county breakdown, the county map, it'd probably make more sense if you weren't drawing districts like this one right here, or even in the Chicago exurban area, this one right here. So this is all to say, guys, that the irony has not been lost all week over the fact that Texas Democrats, of all the places they could go, decided to flee to Illinois in order to protest against gerrymandering. But with that said, take a listen here as NBC's Kristen Welker, in a rare moment of clarity or honesty or whatever you want to call it or refer to it as here, decides to actually confront JB Pritzker on this very question. How are you going to protest gerrymandering when your state is gerrymandered? And he has the nerve here to totally deflect. He claims it's a distraction. He claims it's just a distraction, right? Oh, Texas Republicans talk about that gerrymandering all day long. Talk about Democrat gerrymandering. That's just a distraction, guys. The utter ridiculousness of this. That said, let's just take a listen here. You can see exactly what we're talking about for yourself.
We're providing them a safe haven, a place for them to visit and stay, breaking quorum because they're heroes that are standing up not just for their own constituents and for the people of Texas and their rights, but also for the rights of people all across the country. Because what Greg Abbott is doing and what Donald Trump is attempting to do is to cheat. Decade here, this is they're attempting to change the map. They know that they're going to lose in 2026 the Congress, and so they're trying to steal seats. And so that is what these Texas Democrats are trying to stand up against. And then don't forget, the map that they put together it violates the Voting Rights Act and it violates the Constitution. And so thank God for these Texas House Democrats.
Okay, let's break that down on two different fronts. First of all, right, he's accusing them of stealing seats and cheating. Wonder where I've seen that, right? The shamelessness here, and he's about to be called out on that. So we'll actually, on a rare instance here, let NBC handle it. They decided to have a moment of honesty. Good for them. But secondly, let's address that argument directly that it's supposedly illegal. It violates the Constitution. I don't know what he's talking about in the Constitution. But okay, specifically the Voting Rights Act. This is just blatant misinformation. No, first of all, I'd note first of all, the Voting Rights Act might not be around much longer because the Supreme Court is currently reviewing it. We've explained this before, but that is essentially what mandates the race-based pro-Democrat, it always favors Democrats, by the way, gerrymandering of specifically what are often, red southern states because they have the highest black populations, etc. So basically what it says is if your state has a certain number of a certain minority, you have to draw out these majority minority districts, essentially. And obviously we know how black voters tend to sway in America. So overwhelmingly, you look at a state like Texas, you look at a place like Alabama, there's just random Democrat seats sitting there in a otherwise deep red state. That is exactly why, because this stuff is legally mandated. It only favors the Democrats. The Supreme Court is currently looking at it, reviewing it, because after all, I would argue it is kind of antithetical to the point of civil rights legislation, allegedly, which is to prevent race-based discrimination. So to which I've long said, why it should be overturned. It is inherently discriminatory to force people to draw congressional districts solely on the basis of race. And by the way, it never goes the other way around. Why in New Mexico, a Democrat state, for instance, do you not get a white minority district? Because we know how that is obviously applied. That said, what did Texas do? Well, first of all, it's important to note that the result actually of the ridiculous Voting Rights Act and all of that stuff resulted in a congressional district like this right here. Okay, you're looking at this insane gerrymander. You're like, what is that? Is that something Republicans drew on purpose? No, this is indeed the Texas 33rd congressional seat. It is one of these legally mandated, like the forced pro-Democrat gerrymander majority minority districts that Texas Republicans, I should say, right now are trying to get rid of. But that said, what the Texas Republicans did here was not violate the Voting Rights Act. They actually kept the same number of majority minority seats. What they did was they took away this right here, this ridiculous gerrymander that, Democrats are now saying, we're the ones gerrymandering for getting rid of this, but they added another Hispanic majority district. And why is that important? Why is that beneficial to Republicans? Because if you know anything right now about the nationwide shift of Latino voters, but even specifically in Texas, the South Texas Tejanos, if you look back to 2020 and even before that, were sort of the spearheads of that very political realignment. They've become a lot more Republican in recent years. And so essentially what they're creating there are more Republican favorable districts and seats. So guys, this is all to say that there's no violation of the Voting Rights Act. This has already been fully addressed. By the way, JB, if it's an issue, then we can take it up to court. But you're right now just spewing, oh, it's illegal, it's unconstitutional because we do not like it. No, that's simply not true. And then again, I bring you this right here, right? So it really ought to be a question, frankly, why are Democrats, right? Not to play this game, but it's kind of true. It's actually objectively here what is happening. Why are Democrats so opposed or so upset over the premise that Latino voters might get more electoral representation in the state of Texas? I thought you guys liked that. No, actually, because it turns out the legal citizen Hispanic voters in Texas tend to be a little more right-leaning than perhaps other minority groups across this country. So don't represent them, disenfranchise them, right? So let's just address that. It's not illegal what Texas is currently doing. You can mid-decade redistrict. They did all they could to comply still with the Voting Rights Act, despite the fact it's ridiculous and shouldn't be a thing to begin with. And JB Pritzker is simply wrong. He is lying about it. Now, that said, I feel like I've done plenty to call him out on his own lies, but watch here the absolute cinema as Kristen Welker, whatever her name is here, does that for herself by bringing up, hey, are you seriously gonna go on TV to whine and cry about gerrymandering while you're the Democrat governor of Illinois? And it rapidly goes pretty south for Pritzker. So take a listen.
Well, let's talk about the issue at hand here. Texas Republicans being urged by President Trump, as you just said, are pushing this mid-decade redistricting plan. Their goal is to add as many as 5 GOP seats. In response to Democrats like yourself are thinking of drawing your own maps to boost seats in blue states. Take a listen to what Texas Governor Greg Abbott told my colleague Ryan Chandler about that. Take a look.
What's your message to governors like Newsom, Hochul, Pritzker, who have said they will retaliate if Texas does this?
They have no capability. They've already gerrymandered their states in ways in which they don't have hardly any Republican members of Congress. Look at the map of Illinois. It's drawn in such a way that they can't even squeeze out another Republican. It's a joke.
What's your response to Governor Abbott?
Well, Governor Abbott is the joke. He's the one who is attempting mid-decade here at a time when, frankly, all of us are concerned about the future of democracy. He's literally helping whittle it away and licking the boots of his leader, Donald Trump. Here in Illinois, we followed the law. We provided a map and passed a map that follows the Voting Rights Act and the Constitution and the laws of the state of Illinois. He's attempting to thwart federal law and take away 5 seats that are in the hands of black, brown, minority congresspeople and the people that they represent. He's taking those votes away. He's violating the Constitution. And all of us need to stand up and speak out and make sure that it's understood across the country that what they're trying to do in Texas is illegal.
Well, so here we go again, right? Again, Pritzker here. You notice how the Democrats always go back to the argument that, oh, it's bad because it's mid-decade. Okay, well, why? Why actually, though, is that a bad thing? Especially if you're fixing a wrong, you're righting a wrong, which is poorly drawn congressional maps, especially in response to the fact that Democrats drew amazing congressional maps in their own favor. It's not against the law to do mid-decade redistricting. We just addressed the Voting Rights Act question. By the way, is this guy the lawyer? Is this guy the court? He's going to be able to litigate that, right? What happens if it goes to court and Texas is right? Are you going to still argue it's against the law? What part of the Constitution, by the way, Pritzker? But notice how all of that grandstanding is a just complete deflection from the fact that, guess what? He is ignoring the simple truth, obviously, that his state is egregiously gerrymandered, a bipartisan consensus, a normal human being with their eyes can see that it's gerrymandered. It's not all that hard to notice. And he refuses to address it. I wonder why that is.
Well, Governor, it might be illegal. It's not unprecedented, though, or it might be rare, I should say. But Texas actually tried to redraw districts mid-decade before in 2003, and the U.S. Supreme Court actually upheld the map in that case with the exception of one district. So the argument that Abbott is making is it's not illegal, though they are doing it certainly in an off year. But I do.
Oopsie, it's not illegal. Oopsie. Oh. Isn't that interesting? It's not even unprecedented. So the entire Democrat argument here has just fallen apart, but then watch here as JB Pritzker gets called out for gerrymandering after he the first time tried to dodge the question.
You want to look at the map of Illinois. Let's take a look at this. Despite President Trump winning 44% of the statewide vote in 2024, Republicans hold only 3 of Illinois' 17 districts. These districts seem to be designed to maximize Democratic advantage. What do you say to those who argue that it's hypocritical for you to criticize Texas for partisanship when your state also drew maps to boost your party's standing?
Well, remember that what Texas is trying to do is, again, violate the Voting Rights Act. We didn't. We held public hearings, legislative hearings. People attended them. They spoke out. There was a map that was put out. There were actually changes made to the map. And a map was passed, and it was done at the end of the census, the decennial census. So that's how it's done in this country. You talked about how rare it is to do what he's doing. Yes, it is. What's even rarer is to do it.
But it's happened before. It's happened before. And again, you're still deflecting here because you got now they're changing it, right? They're not saying gerrymandering anymore. Have you noticed that? They're saying, which again, they completely started with that narrative, but then they were like, oh, shoot, people are going to Google our own congressional maps. So now they're saying, oh, it's mid-decade. That's what's bad. Well, it may be rare. Guess what? It's not unprecedented. We, for the millionth time, have addressed the Voting Rights Act. And again, JB Pritzker is not the court here. Okay, if that's a problem, it can be resolved in the court. So what's the big deal? Okay. But notice he again is deflecting here. Is he going to address the fact that his map is extremely partisan? Or are Democrats now finally being mature adults and they're no longer pretending to be these like fair, amazing moral crusaders and admitting that, yeah, it's kind of like politics here. People play dirty. They do what's best to maintain their own power and they do partisan things. Are you going to admit that? Or are you going to keep screaming about your democracy or something here when, again, you guys gerrymandered? You're one of the biggest states in this country. You stole seats from Republicans. Republicans are essentially stealing them back, if you want to look at it that way. And then suddenly, as I keep on saying here, the moment that Democrats realize they have to face a fair election in 2026, that is more actually even in terms of, well, if one side's going to do it, the other side is going to play the same game. Now they're saying it's unfair. It's unfair when they have to face a fair election. Have you noticed this pattern for, I don't know, the past several cycles now, by the way, just saying, right? Thinking back even to 2016 there, it's sort of a repeated trend.
At the behest of the President of the United States, who's clearly attempting to and says that he deserves to have 5 more seats. He's wrong. And he's attempting to change the game because, again, he passed this big, ugly bill. It's hyper unpopular in Texas, among people in Texas and across the country. And he knows he's going to lose the Congress in 2026. That's why he's going to his allies and hoping that they can save him. And we've all got to stand up against this. It's cheating. Donald Trump is a cheater. He cheats on his wives.
Really?
He cheats at golf. And now he's trying to cheat the American people out of their votes.
Well,
sure.
Look, sticking on your state's map, every major group that grades the fairness of congressional maps gives your state an F. Common Cause, a nonpartisan government watchdog, even says your map, and I'm going to quote, represents a nearly perfect model for everything that can go wrong with redistricting. And I guess the question is, you talk about preserving democracy. How do you preserve democracy if you're using the same tactics that you've criticized Texas Republicans for?
But as I say, what they're talking about is a distraction. The reality is that the violation of people's voting rights is what Texas is attempting to do. That's what's wrong with their efforts right now. And the fact that the President of the United States knows it and nevertheless is asking them to do it. That is what's wrong with what we're seeing right now. Democracy is at stake. And these Texas Democrats are standing up to what the GOP is attempting to do, which is to steal seats because they know what they've done is wrong. They know that they've made an enormous mistake.
Let's turn now to foreign policy.
It's a distraction, he says. It's a distraction when you become the big nationwide face of what they're no longer calling, but they were calling in the beginning, the push against Republican gerrymandering, Republicans making the elections unfair and all of this stuff. It's a distraction to point out that your very state's congressional map, according to basically a unanimous bipartisan consensus of watchdogs on this subject is extremely gerrymandered, extremely unfair. It barely somehow, I don't know, honestly, it should be reviewed again, but barely somehow passed the legal test for a okay and approved congressional map. It's just one big distraction, guys. No, it's not a distraction, actually. Because again, if you guys are going to claim unfairness, you guys are going to claim the stealing of seats right now. Okay, we've addressed the legal argument. But on the subject of fairness, I mean, what's going on here, right? Oh, the Republicans are stealing seats. Again, they're stealing back the seats that are entitled to them, that you stole out of them in the state of Illinois. What about the voting rights, supposedly, the fair representation of the Republicans of the state of Illinois, or the people who just forget politics, live in southern Illinois? You've completely screwed them up. Same thing up here, by the way. I mean, what the heck's going on here, right? Utterly ridiculous. But again, this is why, okay, the gaslighting, the lies on this subject just continue to fall apart, okay? And then, like, he just said that. He said, oh, you bringing up my own congressional map when I'm the governor of this state and I approved it. And I, by the way, have been claiming I'm like a fair and noble actor, right? He's been saying, oh, I support a nationwide fairness and all this stuff. I'm against gerrymandering. No, it's not a distraction, actually, to say, hey, why don't you practice what you preach? How come you are saying something that is different than what you are doing? Huh? What's the distraction in that, JB Pritzker? You absolute scumbag. And this, by the way, again, I want to say this again. This is why I completely reject all of the Democrat virtue signaling on gerrymandering, because they're currently trying to play these games that are like, look, we're actually against gerrymandering. If we could have it our way, we would have a nationwide abolishing of it, guys. And, we're going to have independent commissions, and this is truly what we support, but these evil Republicans won't do anything about it, or they won't join us, and it's their fault everything is happening, right? Brian Tyler Cohen, many of these people have said similar things. But here's my problem, okay? When the standard of fair congressional maps looks like this right here, because they've openly said that, we actually covered that in the last video on the subject, or the so-called independent commissions look like the Commission of California, yeah, I'm not really down to buy the argument that we should just go along with the, Democrat bipartisan legislation for fairness, voting rights, all this stuff. It's garbage. And again, they claim they're against gerrymandering. They're not against race-based gerrymandering, which is legally mandated by the legislation that conservatives are currently trying to get overturned in the Supreme Court. Because, gerrymandering is bad. I agree. Yeah, gerrymandering is bad. So let's get rid of race-based gerrymandering, right? Let's get rid of the Voting Rights Act. Just saying. But all right, with that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Is it satisfying for you to watch the narrative here completely fall apart? Again, the hubris. Why even go on TV? Why, like, the guts of Pritzker to think, oh, I'm a good ambassador, come on and talk about gerrymandering. What did you think was going to happen? It's just a distraction, guys. Okay, let me know your thoughts on that, guys, in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.